You need to step back, ma'am. You are not authorized to board this aircraft. The captain's voice was like granite, hard, cold, and unmoving. The woman before him, dressed in a simple black hoodie and yoga pants, looked up from her phone, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. "I think there's a misunderstanding," she said, her voice calm. "This is Flight 7 Alpha Romeo to Zurich." The captain nodded curtly. "Correct. And you are not on the manifest." A humorless laugh escaped her lips. "I don't need to be on the manifest," she stated, stepping forward. He blocked her path. "Ma'am, I won't ask again." She finally met his gaze, the calm vanishing replaced by a glacial fire. "You're right," she said. "You won't ask again, because I don't get on the manifest. I own the manifest. I own the plane. And as of this second, you are fired." Dr. Evelyn Reed did not walk. She glided. At 34 years old, she had cultivated an aura that was equal parts untouchable genius and apex predator. Her company, Aura Innovations, had single-handedly revolutionized the biometric security industry with its flagship product, a seamless AI-driven identity verification system that governments and Fortune 500 companies were scrambling to acquire. She had built her empire from a college dorm room, fueled by ramen caffeine and a rage against a world that had consistently underestimated her. Today, that rage was a quiet, simmering pilot light. She was on the cusp of the biggest deal of her life. A multi-billion-dollar contract with a consortium of Swiss banks that would cement Aura Innovations not just as a market leader, but as a global standard. The final negotiations were in Zurich, and time was a currency she couldn't afford to waste. Her chariot was a Gulfstream G700 tail number N481AR. It was her single greatest indulgence, purchased a year prior. It wasn't just a plane. It was a statement, a $75 million declaration that the little girl from Inglewood, who was told her ambitions were unrealistic, now owned the sky. The jet's interior was a testament to her precise minimalist taste, cream leather, dark ebony wood, and brushed platinum fixtures. It was a sterile, beautiful sanctuary where she did her best work. The contract for the jet's management and crew was held by Orion Executive Air, a top-tier firm that promised seamless white-glove service for the world's elite. Evelyn paid their exorbitant fees without a second thought for the simple reason that they were supposed to make her life easier. Her directives were simple, absolute discretion, unwavering efficiency, and zero complications. This morning, the complications had started early. A critical server array for the Zurich presentation had failed at 3 a.m. Evelyn, along with her top 2 engineers, had been working feverishly in their New York office, bypassing the corrupted hardware and rebuilding the code from the ground up. There was no sleep, only the frantic clatter of keyboards and the low hum of servers. They finished with less than an hour to spare before she had to leave for Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. She didn't have time to go home to her pristine Manhattan penthouse to change. She was still in what she called her coding uniform, a soft, worn black Lululemon hoodie, matching yoga pants and a pair of simple sneakers. Her hair was pulled back into a hasty bun, and she wore no makeup. She looked less like a tech titan and more like a grad student pulling an all-nighter. Her assistant Liam, a perpetually frazzled but impeccably loyal man in his late 20s, met her at the office entrance with a waiting Escalade. "The car is stocked with water and a protein bar," he said, handing her a tablet. "Traffic to Teterboro is surprisingly light. You should be there in 40 minutes. I've already forwarded the final passenger list to Orion. Just you and your security detail, Mr. Harris." Evelyn barely grunted in response, her eyes already scanning the final presentation draft on the tablet. Mr. Harris, a stoic man, built like a refrigerator, sat in the front passenger seat, silent as ever. "Liam," she said, not looking up. "Call ahead. Tell the flight crew I want takeoff the minute my feet are on the plane. No pre-flight pleasantries. Just wheels up. Every second counts." "Already done, Evelyn," he replied. "They know the deal." As the Escalade sped through the Lincoln Tunnel and into the flatlands of New Jersey, Evelyn felt a rare flicker of excitement. This Zurich deal was the culmination of a decade of relentless work. It was the final checkmate in a game few thought she could even play. She closed her eyes, visualizing the moment the Swiss bankers would sign. The victory. She had no idea that the battle she was about to face had nothing to do with corporate negotiations, and that it wouldn't be fought in a boardroom, but on the cold, wind-swept tarmac of the world's busiest private airport. The opponent wouldn't be a rival CEO, but a man she paid to fly her plane. And the stakes would become infinitely higher than just one deal. The Escalade purred to a stop on the ramp at the Signature Flight Support Terminal at Teterboro. Through the tinted window, Evelyn saw her jet N481AR gleaming under the afternoon sun. It was a beautiful machine. The swept wings and powerful Rolls-Royce engines, a perfect embodiment of grace and power. Her power. Mr. Harris was out first, scanning the area with practiced ease. Evelyn slid out after him, tablet still in hand, her mind 1,000 miles away, already in Zurich. She strode toward the jet, the scent of jet fuel sharp in the air. At the base of the air stairs stood a woman in a crisp, tailored uniform, the flight attendant. She was young blonde and had a smile that seemed professionally affixed, but her eyes did a quick, dismissive up-and-down scan of Evelyn's attire. The smile faltered for a fraction of a second. It was a look Evelyn had seen 1,000 times in her life, from teachers, from investors, from rivals. The look that said, "You don't belong here." Evelyn ignored it. She was used to it. She had a plane to catch. "Welcome aboard," the flight attendant, whose name tag read Chloe, chirped with forced brightness. As Evelyn placed a foot on the first step, a man appeared at the top of the stairs, blocking the entrance to the cabin. He was tall, in his late 50s, with silvering hair and a jaw that looked like it was carved from stone. The 4 gold bars on his epaulets identified him as the captain. "Hold on a moment," he said. His voice was deep authoritative and carried a tone of immediate suspicion. Evelyn paused, annoyed at the delay. "Is there a problem, Captain?" "I'm Captain Marcus Thorne. I'm going to need to see your identification and boarding authorization," he said, his eyes as critical as the flight attendant's. Evelyn frowned. This was unusual. In the dozens of flights she'd taken on her own jet, no one had ever asked for her ID on the tarmac. That's what the FBO fixed base operator was for. The seamlessness was the entire point of private travel. "My assistant Liam handled all the authorizations with Orion," she said, her patience thinning. "I need to get in the air. Now." "I understand," Captain Thorne said, though his tone suggested he didn't. However, there was a last-minute manifest update less than an hour ago. The FBO cleared you at the gate, but per our security protocol, any unvetted last-minute additions to the manifest require secondary verification by the captain. I don't have a file photo for a Dr. Evelyn Reed, and frankly, you don't fit the profile of the aircraft's owner. The phrase hung in the air, thick and poisonous. You don't fit the profile. Evelyn felt a familiar coldness seep into her veins. It was the same old story, just at a different altitude. A black woman in a hoodie couldn't possibly own a Gulf Stream. Fit the profile, she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. And what profile is that, Captain? Chloe, the flight attendant, shifted uncomfortably at the bottom of the stairs. Mr. Harris, standing by the car, took a half step forward, his hand twitching almost imperceptibly. Captain Thorne seemed oblivious to the precipice he was standing on. My duty is to the safety and security of this aircraft and its registered principal. I have a name, Dr. Evelyn Reed, but no visual confirmation. You could be anyone. A protester, a corporate spy, anyone. Until I can verify your identity with Orion's head office, you are not authorized to board. The condescension was breathtaking. He spoke to her as if she were a lost child, or worse, a threat. So let me get this straight, Evelyn said, her voice dripping with acid. You see a black woman in a hoodie, and your first thought is corporate spy, not owner, despite the fact that my car was just driven onto the tarmac to this specific jet, and my security detail is standing right there. I'm just following protocol, ma'am, he said, his jaw tightening. The word ma'am was a weapon meant to placate and dismiss simultaneously. There was a security flag on the late manifest change. I have to be cautious. This was the moment. The breaking point. All the exhaustion from the all-nighter, the stress of the Zurich deal, and a lifetime of microaggressions and outright racism boiled over into a single, crystalline point of fury. She was done being patient, done explaining herself, done fitting into other people's boxes. She pulled out her phone. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't scream. Her words were colder and sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. "Mr. Harris," she said. Her eyes locked on Captain Thorne. "Please get the tail number of this aircraft for me." "November 481 Alpha Romeo," Harris recited instantly. Evelyn scrolled through her contacts and pressed a number. It rang once. "Richard Sterling's office. This is Dr. Evelyn Reed. Get him on the phone. Not in a minute. Not in 10 seconds. Now." There was a frantic shuffling on the other end. Richard Sterling was the CEO of Orion Executive Air, a man who prided himself on his client relationships, a man whose company she paid over $1 million a year. "Evelyn, what a surprise. Is everything all right with the flight?" Sterling's voice was slick with the practiced charm of a man who managed billionaires. "No, Richard, it is not," she said, her gaze still fixed on the captain, who was now starting to look uneasy. "I am standing on the tarmac at Teterboro, in front of my jet N481AR, and your captain, a Mr. Marcus Thorne, is refusing me entry." "What? That's impossible. There must be a mistake," Sterling stammered. "Oh, there's a mistake, all right," Evelyn said, "and I'm about to correct it. Richard, are you familiar with Clause 12B of my management contract? Clause 12B, I'd have to—" "Don't bother," she cut him off. "It's the owner's discretion clause. It states that the principal has the right to refuse and dismiss any assigned crew member at any time for any reason without notice. Richard, I am invoking Clause 12B. Captain Marcus Thorne is fired, effective immediately." A stunned silence came from the phone. Captain Thorne's face went from smug certainty to pale shock. "Fired," he mouthed. "And I'm not done." Evelyn continued, her voice devoid of all emotion. His co-pilot, who has been standing silently behind him, complicit in his idiocy, fired. And the flight attendant, Chloe, who looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. She's fired too. The entire crew, Richard. Pack their bags. Get them off my property. I want a new crew here in 90 minutes, or I'm cancelling my contract with Orion, and my lawyers will be spending the next decade suing you for breach of contract and gross discriminatory conduct. Am I clear? Evelyn, please, let's be reasonable, Sterling pleaded. Marcus is one of our best men, a 20-year veteran. His 20 years of experience just taught him to be a prejudiced fool, Evelyn snapped. The clock is ticking, Richard. 90 minutes. She hung up. She looked up at Thorne, whose face had drained of all color. Get off my plane! The 3 crew members stood frozen, their careers evaporating before their eyes on a sunny New Jersey tarmac. They had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had assumed the woman in the hoodie was nobody. They had just learned in the most brutal way possible that she was everybody. The silence that followed Evelyn's decree was heavier than the G700 itself. It was a vacuum sucking the air and arrogance out of Captain Thorne. His mask of professional authority crumbled, revealing a man utterly adrift. The co-pilot David, a younger man who had been a silent observer, now looked like he was going to be sick. Chloe, the flight attendant, just stared, her mouth slightly agape, the professionally affixed smile long gone. You can't be serious. Thorne finally managed to say, his voice a hoarse whisper. Evelyn simply arched an eyebrow. I have never been more serious in my life. You questioned my identity. Now you know it. You are trespassing on my property. Remove yourselves. Mr. Harris took a deliberate step forward, a silent but clear signal that the conversation was over. The implicit threat was all that was needed. Defeated Thorne turned and disappeared into the jet. David followed wordlessly. Chloe cast one last terrified look at Evelyn before scurrying up the stairs after them. Evelyn turned her back on the plane and walked back to the Escalade, sliding into the cool leather of the back seat. She was trembling not from fear, but from pure, unadulterated adrenaline. The fury was still coursing through her. She had been tested, and she had not just won. She had annihilated. Her phone began to buzz incessantly. Richard Sterling. She ignored it. Then a text message came through. New crew is being scrambled from our Westchester base. ETA 75 minutes. My deepest, most sincere apologies. We will make this right. Evelyn scoffed. Make this right? There was no making this right. There was only setting an example. Liam called, his voice frantic. Evelyn, I'm getting alerts from Orion. What happened? They're saying you dismissed the whole crew. I did, she said calmly. They refused me entry to my own plane, Liam. They decided I didn't fit the profile. Liam went silent for a moment. He knew her history. He knew the battles she'd fought. Okay, he said. His voice now firm, all panic gone. Okay, what do you need? I need you to get ahead of this, she commanded. I want you to draft a formal complaint to Orion. Cite the clause I mentioned. Detail the discriminatory language used by the captain. I want this documented legally airtight. And find out everything you can about that crew. Thorne, Chloe, the co-pilot. Everything. On it, he replied. Minutes later, the disgraced crew descended the stairs, each carrying a small roller bag. They walked past the Escalade without looking at it, their expressions a mixture of shame, anger, and disbelief. They were escorted by a signature employee to the main terminal building, their high-flying careers summarily grounded. True to his word, a new crew arrived 78 minutes later. The new captain, a man named Peters, approached Evelyn's car with a palpable sense of trepidation. He was professional, deferential, and visibly nervous. Dr. Reed, he said, addressing her through the open window. I'm Captain Peters. My crew and I are ready for departure as soon as you are. I want to apologize on behalf of Orion for the unacceptable incident you experienced. Evelyn just gave him a curt nod. Just get us to Zurich. Within 15 minutes, the G700 was taxiing to the runway. As the powerful engines spooled up and the jet hurtled into the sky, Evelyn finally allowed herself to relax. She looked out the window at the sprawling metropolis shrinking below. She had faced down prejudice and had won. She had asserted her power in the most unambiguous way possible. The message to Orion and to the world was clear. You do not mess with Evelyn Reed. The story, as she expected, leaked. Liam's carefully worded complaint was countered by a flurry of internal reports at Orion. But the initial narrative was irresistible. A self-made black female billionaire denied access to her own jet by an arrogant, biased crew fires them all on the spot. By the time she landed in Zurich, it was already a minor story on aviation blogs. By the next morning, it was a sensation. A tweet from a Teterboro ramp agent who witnessed the confrontation went viral. Hashtag Jet Justice and hashtag Fly While Black started trending. Evelyn was transformed from a tech CEO into a cultural icon overnight. The media portrayed her as a hero, a powerful symbol of defiance against systemic prejudice. Major news outlets ran flattering profiles. Talk show hosts sang her praises. She gave one and only one interview to a prominent journalist from the Wall Street Journal, carefully controlling the narrative. This wasn't about anger. She said, her voice calm, and measured a picture of grace under pressure. It was about accountability. In my world, excellence is the standard. Prejudice in any form is a failure to meet that standard, and failure has consequences. The Zurich deal was a resounding success. The Swiss bankers, already impressed with her technology, were now in awe of her steely public persona. They saw her not just as a brilliant innovator, but as an unflappable leader. The contracts were signed, and Aura Innovation's stock surged by 30%. Evelyn was on top of the world. She had her victory, her deal, and the adoration of millions. She had scorched the earth, and from the ashes a legend had been born. She believed she was untouchable. But the problem with scorching the earth is that you never know what seeds of destruction you might have inadvertently planted. And in the shadows, a different kind of journalist was starting to ask questions. A journalist who wasn't interested in heroes or villains, only in the complicated, messy truth. Sarah Jenkins was not the kind of journalist who chased trending topics. A Pulitzer Prize nominee for her exposé on predatory lending in the defense industry, she worked for a long-form investigative journal, known for its meticulous, often contrarian reporting. While the rest of the world was celebrating Evelyn Reed's girl boss moment, Sarah smelled something off. It wasn't that she doubted the existence of racism. She had documented its systemic effects her entire career. It was the neatness of the story that bothered her. The perfect hero, the cartoonish villains, the swift, satisfying justice. Life in her experience was rarely so tidy. Her inquiry began not with Evelyn, but with the crew. She started with a simple question: who was Captain Marcus Thorne? The official narrative painted him as a relic, a prejudiced old guard pilot. But his record told a different story. 22 years in the U.S. Air Force flying high-stakes transport missions. 15 years in commercial and private aviation with an absolutely spotless record. Not a single complaint. Dozens of commendations for his meticulous attention to safety and security protocols. He was universally described by former colleagues as by the book, unflappable, and a pilot's pilot. It didn't add up. Finding Thorne was difficult. He had been forced to sign a stringent non-disclosure agreement with Orion as part of a paltry severance package. He wasn't talking. Sarah, however, was persistent. Using a former Air Force contact, she found his brother who lived in rural Pennsylvania. After a week of careful persuasion, the brother convinced Marcus to speak with her off the record. Sarah met him at a small diner 100 miles from any airport. The man she saw was not the arrogant monster from the stories. He was a ghost. He had lost 20 pounds. His eyes were hollow, and his hands trembled slightly as he held his coffee cup. "She ruined me," he said, his voice raspy. "One day I was at the top of my profession. The next I'm uninsurable, unhirable. My career is over. My reputation, gone." "Tell me what happened, Marcus," Sarah said gently. "From your perspective." Thorne took a deep breath. "It was the protocol. That's all it was. We got a manifest update less than an hour before arrival. That's a red flag. The update came from a junior assistant's email, not from the usual secure portal. Another red flag. The name Evelyn Reed was on it, but the passenger ID field was corrupted. It just showed a string of numbers. That's a major security flag." Sarah leaned forward, her pen poised. "A security flag Evelyn's team never mentioned that." "Of course not," Thorne scoffed. "My instructions drilled into me by Orion's own security chief are explicit any last-minute manifest anomaly, especially one originating from an insecure channel, requires the pilot in command to perform a visual ID check against a company file photo or government-issued ID. I didn't have a file photo, so I asked for ID." "She claims you told her she didn't fit the profile," Sarah pressed. A flash of anger crossed Thorne's face. "I said the situation didn't fit the profile of a secure arrival. The corrupted manifest, the unverified source. Not her, but she twisted it. She wanted it to be about race. Maybe for her, everything is. I don't know. But I saw a potential security breach, not a skin color. My job is to protect the asset, the plane, and the principal. What if she wasn't Evelyn Reed? What if she was someone posing as her to get on that plane and sabotage it? Or worse?" He slumped back in his seat. "Did I handle it with perfect grace? Maybe not. I was tired. It was my 4th flight that week. And yes, she was dressed. Unexpectedly. Maybe my tone was off. But my actions were 100% by the book. Orion's book. They threw me under the bus to protect their billion-dollar client. They even silenced my co-pilot and flight attendant with NDAs and threats." Sarah's journalistic instincts were screaming. This was the missing piece. The context that had been surgically removed from the public narrative. Her next stop was a disgruntled former IT security manager at Orion Executive Air. After some digging, he confirmed Thorne's story. There had been a security bulletin issued 3 months prior after a rival company had an activist sneak onto a CEO's jet. The new protocol was Thorne's exact description. He even forwarded Sarah the confidential memo. Next, she found Chloe, the flight attendant. She was working as a waitress in a chain restaurant in Florida, trying to pay for her mother's mounting medical bills. She told Sarah through tears that her dismissive look was one of panic. She had seen the corrupted manifest on her tablet and was trying to subtly signal to Captain Thorne that there was an issue as Evelyn approached. "I wasn't looking down on her," Chloe sobbed. "I was looking at my tablet at the red warning icon next to her name and then back at her, wondering what we were supposed to do. He was just doing his job. We all were." The picture was becoming clearer and darker. Evelyn Reed hadn't been a victim of overt racism. She had been the subject of a standard, if clumsily executed, security procedure. a procedure necessitated by a mistake likely made by her own assistant Liam, who had rushed the manifest update from an insecure email. Fueled by her own past experiences and the pressure of the moment, Evelyn hadn't sought clarification. She hadn't asked, "What is the protocol issue?" She had leaped to the conclusion that served her worldview, a world where she was constantly under attack. And in her righteous fury, she hadn't just fired 3 people. She had vaporized their lives, their savings, and their futures. Sarah Jenkins now had the truth. It was messy, complicated, and had no clear hero. And she knew that publishing it would be like dropping a bomb on the carefully constructed legend of Dr. Evelyn Reed. Sarah Jenkins spent 3 weeks writing the article. She triple-sourced every fact. She included the text of the Orion security memo. She got a statement from an aviation security expert confirming that Thorne's actions, while perhaps lacking in bedside manner, were textbook procedure for a captain prioritizing security. She detailed the devastating personal and financial fallout for Thorne Chloe and the co-pilot David, whose wife had left him under the strain. The centerpiece of the article was the contrast between the public narrative and the documented facts. It didn't absolve Thorne of potential unconscious bias, but it reframed his actions from malicious prejudice to professional diligence. The article's true focus, however, was on Evelyn Reed's reaction. It painted a portrait not of a heroic victim, but of a New Age monarch, so insulated by wealth and power, and so conditioned to see slights that she used a nuclear option to solve a minor dispute. The title of the piece was Stark Tale Number N481AR, the hero of #Jet Justice and the lives left in her wake. The article was published online on a Tuesday morning. The internet went into meltdown. The initial reaction was denial. Evelyn Reed's supporters, who had championed her as a symbol of racial justice, cried foul. They accused Sarah Jenkins of being a racist apologist, of orchestrating a hit piece to tear down a successful black woman. The hashtags shifted from #JetJustice to #ProtectEvelyn. But the facts were irrefutable. The leaked Orion memo was the smoking gun. The tearful interview with Chloe went viral. The hollowed-out image of Marcus Thorne became a symbol of a different kind of injustice cancellation by a billionaire's whim. Slowly then, all at once, the tide of public opinion turned against Evelyn. The story was no longer about racism. It was about an abuse of power. The same people who had celebrated her for firing the crew now condemned her for it. She was no longer a hero. She was a bully. An arrogant CEO who refused to believe she or her team could ever make a mistake. The fallout in the corporate world was swift and brutal. The board of Aura Innovations, who had basked in the glow of her positive PR, were now horrified. Their stock, which had soared after the Zurich deal, began to hemorrhage value. The brand was now associated not with cutting-edge security, but with corporate cruelty and unchecked ego. The Swiss bankers from the Zurich deal were particularly appalled. Their culture valued discretion, stability, and quiet competence above all else. Evelyn's public drama, first her celebrated victimhood, and now her exposed ruthlessness, was the antithesis of their ethos. Whispers began in the financial press that the consortium was invoking a reputational risk clause in their contract, looking for a way out. Evelyn, ensconced in her penthouse, was in a state of siege. She was livid, viewing Sarah Jenkins's article as a personal betrayal by the media that had built her up. "They're trying to destroy me, Liam," she seethed, pacing her vast living room. "This is what they always do. They can't stand to see a black woman with this much power." Liam, for the first time, did not agree. He looked pale. Evelyn, the manifest, the security flag. Was it my fault? Did I send it from the wrong email? Evelyn stopped pacing and glared at him. Don't be ridiculous. This is not about a technicality. It's about a racist captain who insulted me. You will not entertain this nonsense. But the seed of doubt was planted. The board called an emergency meeting. Evelyn strode in, expecting to command the room, as she always did. Instead, she was met with a wall of cold, anxious faces. The chairman, a man who had been her staunchest supporter, spoke first. Evelyn, this is a catastrophe, he said, his voice grim. The Swiss are pulling out. They've officially put us on notice. The stock is down 46%. We've lost $5 billion in market cap in a week. The brand is toxic. So we fight back, Evelyn shot back. We issue a statement, we discredit this journalist. We can't, another board member interjected. Her facts are solid. Our own internal review confirms the security protocol story. We look like bullies, Evelyn. Worse, you look like a liar. The words hit her like a physical blow. Liar. Her entire career was built on the unimpeachable truth of her intellect and the quality of her code. What are you saying? She whispered. The chairman sighed, the sound echoing in the silent boardroom. The board has had a vote of no confidence. We're asking for your resignation as CEO of Aura Innovations. You can remain on the board as a founder, but you must step down from all executive duties, effective immediately. It was a corporate execution. The company she had bled for, the empire she had built from nothing, was being taken from her. She had won the battle on the tarmac, but the war for her own creation was now definitively lost. In her quest for accountability from others, she had created a world in which she had none herself. The scorched earth policy had finally burned down her own house. Resignation was a gentle word for what happened. It was an ousting. The press release was couched in corporate jargon about a new direction and thanking Dr. Reed for her visionary leadership. But everyone knew the truth. The Queen had been deposed. Evelyn retreated to her penthouse, the silence of the space now deafening. The city lights outside, which once seemed to celebrate her success, now felt like mocking eyes. She stopped taking calls. She fired Liam, blaming him in a fit of rage for the initial manifest error, the final desperate act of a leader who could not accept her own culpability. The world moved on with brutal speed. Aura Innovations appointed a new, safe, unremarkable CEO who immediately went on an apology tour. He settled a multi-million-dollar lawsuit with Thorne, Chloe, and David for wrongful termination and defamation. The press release for the settlement included a public apology from the company, but not from Evelyn to the former crew. This was perhaps the cruelest cut. It was a public corporate admission that she had been wrong. One evening, months later, Evelyn was scrolling aimlessly through a news feed when she saw a headline from a major aviation journal. Delta hires Captain Marcus Thorne for senior training role, citing impeccable judgment under pressure. There was a photo of Thorne looking older and grayer, but standing tall in a new uniform. He had been vindicated. He was hired not in spite of the incident with Evelyn, but because of it. In a post-9/11 world, an airline wanted a pilot who would follow security protocol to the letter, even in the face of a furious billionaire. His perceived flaw had been rebranded as his greatest strength. The article mentioned that a portion of his settlement had been used to create a legal defense fund for aviation professionals who face wrongful termination. He had turned his ruin into a cause. Evelyn threw her tablet across the room, where it shattered against a marble wall. The karma, however, was not yet finished with her. The true gut-wrenching blow came a year after her ousting. Aura Innovations, under its new risk-averse leadership, was struggling to innovate. Without Evelyn's vision and relentless drive, the company that had once been a disruptive force was now just another lumbering tech giant. Its stock stagnated. A rival company led by a young, hungry innovator who reminded the world of a younger Evelyn Reed released a new biometric system that was faster, cheaper, and more secure than Aura's. It made her life's work look obsolete overnight. The board of Aura, desperate to salvage shareholder value, agreed to a merger. Aura Innovations. The empire Evelyn had built was swallowed by its competitor. Her name, once synonymous with the future, was now a footnote in a corporate history book. The final piece of karma was quieter, more personal. She still had the jet. N482AR. It sat in a hangar at Teterboro, a monument to her downfall. She had the money to keep it, but she never used it. The very sight of it made her feel sick. It wasn't a symbol of power anymore. It was a $75 million tombstone for her career. One day she instructed her financial manager to sell it. The market for used jets was soft. She took a massive loss. The jet which she had once refused a man entry to was now gone. All she had left was the money and the memory. The memory of a cold afternoon on a windy tarmac, where in a single moment of unrestrained pride and fury, she had set a fire that consumed everything she had ever built. She had demanded accountability, and in the end, the universe had held her accountable in the most complete and devastating way imaginable. 2 years, 24 months, 730 days. For Dr. Evelyn Reed, time had ceased to be a currency she spent, and had become a tide that was slowly drowning her. The world which had once spun on her axis now spun on without her, its indifference a constant grinding insult. Her ousting from Aura Innovations hadn't been a clean cut. It was an amputation performed without anesthetic, leaving a phantom limb of power that ached with maddening persistence. The initial months had been a blur of incandescent rage. She lived in her penthouse like a deposed monarch in exile, surrounded by the opulent trappings of a kingdom she no longer ruled. She'd fired Liam in a single brutal phone call. His stammered apologies swallowed by her venomous accusations. He had been the scapegoat for her own catastrophic lack of judgment, and casting him out had provided a fleeting, hollow satisfaction. She spent weeks with her lawyers, exploring scorched earth lawsuits against her own board, against Sarah Jenkins, against Orion Executive Heir. But her legal team men, who were paid handsomely to be ruthless, advised her against it with unnerving gentleness. The public record was not in her favor. A protracted legal battle would only cement her reputation as a toxic pariah. The war was over. She had lost. She tried to re-enter the arena. A year after her exit, she funneled $10 million of her own money into a new startup, Nix Security. The concept was brilliant, a quantum leap forward in predictive threat analysis. The code she wrote in those lonely nights was as elegant and formidable as anything she had ever created. Her genius had not deserted her. But genius, she was learning, was not enough. The first pitch to a top-tier venture capital firm on Sand Hill Road was a disaster. The younger partners were visibly starstruck, but the senior partners, the ones who wrote the checks, were cautious. They praised the technology effusively. "Truly revolutionary, Evelyn," one said. But then came the inevitable question. "We need to address the elephant in the room," the lead partner said, steepling his fingers. "The Aura situation. A company's culture is set from the top. We need assurance that our investment will be protected from reputational volatility." Evelyn's composure, so carefully constructed, began to crack. "The aura situation," she repeated, her voice laced with ice, "was a gross mischaracterization of a leader holding her subordinates accountable. It was perceived as an issue of temperament," the VC countered smoothly, "and in this market, perception is reality. We can't back a founder who might become a liability." They passed. So did the next firm, and the next. The feedback was always the same, couched in the bloodless jargon of Silicon Valley: leadership-style concerns, brand alignment issues, managing reputational risk. They loved her mind, but they feared her history. The story of the tarmac had become her origin story, and her obituary all in one. The brilliant black woman who had stood up to racism had been overwritten by the story of the arrogant billionaire who destroyed lives over a misunderstanding. She was no longer a symbol of aspiration. She was a cautionary tale told in hushed tones in boardrooms and over expensive lunches. Her social life withered and died. The invitations to galas and tech summits stopped arriving. The friends who had celebrated her victories now screened her calls. They were business people, and she was bad for business. The sycophants who had once orbited her like moons vanished, seeking a new sun to warm themselves by. Her world shrank to the dimensions of her penthouse, the silence broken only by the hum of the climate control and the distant sounds of a city that thrived without her. She had her fortune, a number on a screen that could buy anything but the one thing she craved: relevance. The impulse that drove her back to Teterboro arrived on a crisp, painfully bright October afternoon. It was the 2-year anniversary of the signing of the Zurich deal, the greatest triumph of her career, which had also been the prelude to her ruin. An automated reminder popped up on her calendar, a digital ghost from a former life. Celebrate Zurich victory. Champagne at the Four Seasons. The irony was so profound, it was almost physically painful. She didn't call for an Escalade. She used a generic ride-sharing app, summoning an anonymous black sedan. As the car sped along the highway into New Jersey, every landmark was a station of the cross on her journey to corporate crucifixion. The skyline of Manhattan, once her conquered territory, so seemed to mock her from across the river. She directed the driver not to the gleaming signature terminal, but to a small, unassuming public space called the Teterboro Airport Observation Park. It was a place she never knew existed, a place for ordinary people. She got out of the car, a woman in an elegant but understated cashmere coat and dark sunglasses, and walked to a cold metal bench. The park was occupied by a handful of plane spotters, hobbyists with long lens cameras and handheld scanners that crackled with air traffic control chatter. They paid her no mind. To them, she was just another civilian, not the woman who had once owned one of the very titans they were here to photograph. The air smelled of autumn leaves and burned kerosene. The noise was a constant symphony of power, the whine of auxiliary power units, the deep rumble of taxiing jets, and the earth-shaking roar of takeoffs. For years, this had been the soundtrack of her life, the sound of her own ascent. Now it was the sound of a world she was no longer a part of. She watched for an hour, a spectator to the lives of the global elite she once embodied. A Learjet, small and nimble, a massive Bombardier Global Express. Then she saw it. A Gulfstream G700, its lines as sleek and familiar as her own reflection. It taxied into view, its pearlescent white paint gleaming. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought it was N4A1AR. A wave of nausea and a phantom sense of ownership washed over her. But as it turned, she saw the tail number was different. The logo on the tail was that of a major charter company. Her jet had been sold, stripped of its identity, and put into service for anyone who could afford the hourly rate. The air stairs deployed. A family emerged, a father in a bespoke suit, a mother in stylish travel wear, and two young children who squealed with delight as they ran down the steps toward a waiting Range Rover. They were a portrait of effortless wealth and happiness. Then the crew descended. A young flight attendant, a co-pilot, and finally the captain. He was talking on his headset, doing a final walk-around of the nose gear. When he turned, the afternoon sun caught his face. It was Captain Peters, the replacement pilot, the man who had flown her to Zurich after the storm. He looked exactly the same. Perhaps a few more lines around his eyes, but he had the same air of calm competence. He finished his call, laughed at something the co-pilot said, and gave the flight attendant a friendly pat on the shoulder. They looked like a team, a normal, functioning, professional team. Watching him, a man whose life was utterly untouched by the drama of that day, was the final devastating blow. His reward for his quiet professionalism was that he got to keep his life. He was still in the sky, still in command, still respected. He was everything she wasn't. She sat on that cold bench, and finally, after 2 years of rage and denial, she allowed the truth to enter. She replayed the scene on the tarmac, but this time she took herself out of the starring role of the righteous victim. She forced herself to see it from the outside. She saw a man, Captain Thorne, whose entire professional existence was built on a foundation of rules, checklists, and protocols. He saw a red flag in his system, a corrupted manifest, an unverified source, and he reacted as he was trained to. Perhaps his tone was off. Perhaps he was tired or intimidated, or even held a sliver of unconscious bias. But his actions were not born of malice. They were born of procedure. And what of her own actions? She had arrived exhausted and stressed, a bundle of raw nerves. She saw his procedural caution through the lens of a lifetime of slights and insults. She hadn't heard a captain enforcing a security rule. She had heard every teacher who ever told her to be more realistic. Every investor who passed on her, every man who ever condescended to her. Thorne became the avatar for all of them, and she had gloried in his destruction. The most painful realization was this: she had a choice. A dozen of them. At any point, she could have changed the outcome. She could have smiled and said, "I understand completely. Captain, security first. Here's my license." The whole affair would have lasted less than a minute. A moment of annoyance, a quick verification, and then the smooth climb to 40,000 feet. She would have made it to Zurich, closed her deal, and her life would have continued its upward trajectory. But she hadn't wanted that. The truth, ugly and sharp, finally pierced her consciousness. She hadn't wanted a solution. She had wanted a fight. She had been spoiling for one. She had wanted to prove that she was powerful enough to swat away anyone who dared to question her. She had used a cannon to kill a fly, and she had celebrated the explosion, never realizing the blast would bring her own fortress crashing down. Her power hadn't been in the jet, or the stock price, or the company name. It had been in her reputation, her vision, her ability to lead. On that tarmac, in a fit of pique, she had willfully exchanged all of that for the cheap, fleeting thrill of absolute dominance over 3 employees. It was the worst trade of her life. A Boeing 737, repurposed for a corporate client, roared down the runway, its engines screaming. It lifted into the air, a symbol of immense power and freedom. climbing into the endless blue. Evelyn Reed watched until it was just a speck in the sky. She felt a profound, absolute stillness. She was grounded. Not just from flying, but from the life she had built, the future she had envisioned, and the person she had once been. The echoes of her own fury on that windy ramp 2 years ago had finally faded, replaced by a silence more damning than any accusation. She had won, and in doing so had lost everything. The story of Dr. Evelyn Reed is a modern tragedy. It's a gripping reminder that the line between justice and vengeance can be dangerously thin. She won the battle on the tarmac, but in the court of public opinion and in the quiet of her own life, she suffered a total loss. It forces us to ask ourselves some difficult questions. Where does accountability end and cruelty begin? How much of our reaction to a situation is based on the present moment versus the baggage we carry from our past? Evelyn's story shows that in our interconnected world, no action happens in a vacuum. The ripples of that one decision on the tarmac spread out, eventually creating a tidal wave that came crashing back down on her. It's a powerful lesson about pride, perspective, and the immense responsibility that comes with power. If this story made you think, if it sparked a conversation, then please help us share it. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone you think needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into stories that reveal the complexities of our world. Let us know in the comments. Was Evelyn's initial action justified, or was her downfall a fitting dose of karma? We want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.